Hello everyone, Iconic Masters will be on sale a week from today and I'm excited to draft another Masters set. These sets are designed with draft in mind and they're always a lot of fun. I'm going to try to record at least 4 drafts with it. However, I won't be doing a full set review for Iconic Masters like I do for other sets. This is because between the limited quantity and the price tag of drafts for this format, most of us won't be able to get in more than a few. I will, however, be bringing you this video now, obviously enough. I look at the best commons and uncommons in this set, and tomorrow I will post a guide to the archetypes of Iconic Masters. Additionally, this week's MTG Top 10 was also on the biggest bombs in the format, so hopefully I'm not letting you down too much on the Iconic Masters content. Now, let's get started with the best white uncommons. I think the third best white uncommon is Topin Freeblade. This is a card that was at common last time we saw it, and it really dominated the format. It was in Magic Origins, it was incredibly powerful. That format turned out to be very fast, and it was because of powerful 2-drops like Topin Freeblade at common. Upping it to uncommon, it makes it, you're not going to get as many of them, but it's still a ridiculous 2-drop, a 2-mana 2-2 with Vigilance. If you get in with it, it's a 3-3 with Vigilance, and that is a big problem for your opponent. The next best uncommon, I think, is Serra Angel. We've seen her several times. She's always good. She's been first pickable for a long time, since the olden days of Magic, and she still is. We have Air Elemental right now in Ixalan, right? Well, she's Air Elemental, but she also has Vigilance, so she's an incredibly good card. At uncommon, she is the kind of uncommon that you'd like to first pick. Topin Freeblade I don't think is quite as first pickable in this format. I'm not going to start with it there anyway. If this format turns out to be incredibly fast, it will be first pickable, but it's still a very high rank uncommon. I would take it early in a pack, just not first pick like Serra Angel. And then the best uncommon is, of course, Swords to Plowshares. This is removal that deals with anything, unless it has hexproof, I guess. Yes, it lets your opponent gain life, but you're going to trade up on this so hard. You're going to kill their 5-drop with your 1-mana spell, and that's going to be incredible. It's instant speed. It does everything you want a removal spell to do. It's going to be very hard to want to pass Swords to Plowshares, although there are a large number of big, bomby rares in this format that I would take over it. But Swords to Plowshares, Serra Angel, both cards I'd feel good about first picking. Topin Freeblade a little less, but those are some pretty strong uncommons. Now let's move to the white commons. I think the third best white common is Stalwart Aven, another card from Magic Origins that was one of the major reasons why the set was so aggressive. This is a 3-mana 1/3 with flying, who also has Renown, and it can get a +1/+1 counter when it hits the opponent the first time. Worth noting, I forgot to mention it with Topin Freeblade, +1/+1 counters are a sub-theme in this set within both green-white and black-green. And so cards with Renown are going to be even a little better than they were last time, in some sense at least, because they'll actually synergize well with all the +1/+1 counter cards. The next best common white card is Seeker of the Way, a card we saw back in Khans of Tarkir. It was uncommon, so it's been downshifted, and it's very strong. A 2-mana 2/2 with all kinds of upside. Prowess means your opponent blocking it could go really, really wrong if they're trying to block it with a 2-drop, and the fact that it gains lifelink is great too. Life gain is the black-white archetype in this format. I'll talk more about those archetypes in a video tomorrow, but so it works well in the life gain deck, and it also works well in decks that care about spells because of Prowess. It's a great card. It's one that's worth first picking in weaker packs. And I think the best white common is Blinding Mage. This is basically Master Decoy. We see this card all the time. It's always good. 2-mana 1/2 who can tap things is great. It's almost a removal spell that happens to have a body and can attack and block if it needs to. That's a very good card. It really is the kind of white common that you want to be first picking a lot of the time. So white is pretty good in commons and uncommons. Now let's move to blue. I think the third best blue uncommon, and admittedly it was kind of hard for me to choose a third best one. There aren't that many that are like excellent as the third best, but in the end I chose Cephalid Broker. This is a card from back in Torment, Judgment, one of those sets in that block, and a 4-mana 2/2 isn't great, but we love looting, right? Looting is a powerful effect in Limited, and this lets you loot twice. And that's very good. The card selection it's going to give you is very good. It does die to like a lot of things, and you're not going to want it in every kind of deck. This is because it's not going to be good if you're trying to be aggressive, for example. However, if you're in a more controlling deck, it's the exact kind of card you want. It's the kind of card that will just grind you out more value than your opponent's going to get just drawing one card a turn and not getting to look at a bunch of other cards. I think the next best blue uncommon is Aetherize. This returns all attacking creatures to their owner's hand. You can use this to bounce your opponent's creatures. That's usually what you want to do. But another possibility with it, depending on what's going on, is you can actually use it to return your creatures to your hand if your opponents, say, tries to kill one of your creatures or get a 2-for-1 on you or something like that. Usually, though, you want to bounce your opponent's creatures. It's great against combat tricks. It's great against auras. You're sometimes going to actually claim a card and not just a big tempo boost. It's a good card. One I would consider first picking, but still not one that I'm really excited about. However, the best blue uncommon is something I'm pretty excited about first picking, and that is Illusory Ambusher. This is kind of a crazy card. A 5-mana 4/1 with Flash doesn't sound great, but that line of text underneath Flash is incredibly powerful. Whenever it's dealt damage, you draw that many cards, okay? So this isn't really a Magical Christmas Land scenario where you flash in Illusory Ambusher, block a 3/3 with it, let's say, and you get to draw 3 cards. Ideally, you flash it in to kill something that hits it even harder but only has 4 toughness, and then you get to draw a ton of cards. This card's easily going to be a 2-for-1, and frequently it's going to be like a 4-for-1. It's a great card. It's, you do have to leave mana up for it, but in a deck that's blue that happens to have a lot of counter magic, which there's a lot of in this set, being able to leave mana up to either counter something or just play this Ambusher and just destroy your opponent with the amount of card advantage you get, plus it's basically a removal spell, is pretty incredible. Illusory Ambusher is the best blue uncommon. I will be first picking it in mini packs. Now let's move to blue commons. The third best blue common isn't anything exciting, but he's efficient and he does what he needs to do, and that is Phantom Monster. 4 mana for a 3/3 with flying is a great rate. We don't see that at common hardly ever these days in limited formats. Of course, this is a Masters set, so it's powered up a little bit. And you'll be happy to play it. Most blue decks will be like, sure, I'll take 2 of those. Don't want to first pick it. It'd have to be a horrendous pack, which there aren't going to be many of in this format, for you to first pick it, but it's a solid blue common. Next, we have Frostlinks. Every time we see Frostlinks or cards like it, they're pretty good. This is because in the early game, you can play it as a creature that taps something down and lets you get in for damage, and it can still do that in the late game. So it's a 3-drop creature that's good at every stage of the game, basically. You can even use it defensively if you have to. It is better to use offensively because it makes one of your opponent's creatures unable to block for 2 combats, and it only stops your opponent from attacking you for 1 combat. But it can do a lot of work. It's a great card. It is sort of borderline first pickable depending on the pack you have. And then we have Claustrophobia, which is, one of Blue's sort of classic removal spells that's actually good. 3 mana to basically tap down a creature forever is quite good. Granted, it can't deal with activated abilities and things like that, but Blue can never get the kind of removal that just like erases something, at least not usually. But these are the 3 best blue commons. Claustrophobia, I'd feel fine about first picking. Frostlinks, I'd feel okay about first picking. And Phantom Monster, I do not want to be first picking, but they're all good blue commons. Now let's move to black. The third best black uncommon is Ulcerate. We've seen this card before. I think it was in Magic 2015. All of these cards, by the way, obviously we've seen before, but some of them more recently, and those are the ones that I'm really remembering when they came out. Ulcerate we saw very recently, and it was good in Magic 2015. Yes, you have to lose 3 life, but 1 mana to give something -3/-3 means you're always trading up, and it has the added bonus of being usable as more of a combat trick. So say your opponent attacks with their 6/6 and you have a 4/4 blocker, you can still take the thing down with Ulcerate and blocking with your creature, and that's pretty great. Ulcerate is, I think, going to be first pickable in a lot of packs. The next best uncommon is Indulgent Tormentor, and it is incredibly powerful. 5 mana for a 5/3 with flying is already a great rate, but it has a whole other line of text that is pretty devastating. You either get to draw a card on your upkeep in addition to your usual card, or your opponent has to sacrifice a creature or lose 3 life. When you're making your opponent make those decisions with the creature, a huge flying creature like this one, that's awesome because your opponent is going to be really in trouble. They can't sacrifice too many creatures. They're going to lose the race if they do. They don't want you to draw cards because you're going to outcard them, and they don't want to lose 3 life because there's a 5 power evasive threat. But they're going to have to do one of them, and that's what makes this so strong. It's a great card. It is first pickable. I do have 1 card above it, but I could definitely see myself flip-flopping it depending on how this set goes. And I have Doomblade as the best uncommon. It's just an incredibly efficient removal spell. It's insane. We don't get this kind of removal really anymore. 2 mana to kill almost anything at instant speed. We don't see that in limited formats these days, but we're seeing it in this one. And Doomblade's great. As I said, though, Indulgent Tormentor can really take over a game to the point that I think it might actually be better than Doomblade. I'm going to start the format by valuing Doomblade more highly, taking the removal, the great removal over the really good creature. But I could easily see Indulgent Tormentor becoming the best black uncommon. Now let's move to black commons. I think the third best black common is Phyrexian Rager. 3 mana for a 2/2 that draws you a card, you do have to pay a life, is pretty great. It's easily a 2-for-1 a lot of the time. Say your opponent plays a 2-drop, you play your Rager, they attack with their 2-drop, and you block, and you come out a card ahead of your opponent. And, you know, drawing a card is actually a really big deal, especially limited. Your deck's smaller. You're going to see more of your deck. It's just a great card. Solid common. Not one you want to first pick, but one that, you know, you're pretty happy to have in any black deck. Reeve's Soul is next. This is just a very efficient removal spell at killing smaller things. You're going to be able to trade up with it a lot of the time. I mean, 3-drops, 4-drops, even 5-drops have 3 power or less, and that's pretty great. It will be interesting to see if this is quite as good as it was in Magic Origins. In Origins, this was a great card because so many creatures were smaller, and it was an aggressive format, and you had to have a way to interact. But I think it'll still be pretty good here, and I would at least consider first picking it. But I think the best black common is Grisly Spectacle, which I think you want to first pick a lot of the time. It can't destroy artifact creatures, but it can destroy the rest at instant speed, and it also mills your opponent. Normally, that line of text wouldn't matter, but the blue-black deck in this format, one of the ways it has of winning, it's basically a control deck that can win with milling. There's enough milling going on in that color pair that you can actually win with it in this format. You can also just win with a big, scary creature. But my point is that the fact that you're milling your opponent some cards actually matters in this format if you're a blue-black deck. And if you're not, it is basically just trinket text that you can just disregard, but it's still a very efficient removal spell. You know, it's not quite Doomblade, but Doomblade's uncommon. Grisly Spectacle is black's common removal spell. Very good. I think it's worth first picking a lot of the time. Now let's move to the best red uncommons. I think the third best red uncommon is Rift Bolt. 3 mana to do 3 to a creature or player at sorcery speed is solid. It's already a good card, but you can also suspend this. Now, this is an interesting card because in Constructed, you basically always want to suspend it, right? But in Limited, you're not always going to want to do that. Sometimes you will, but sometimes you just need to kill something right away. Sometimes if you play this, your opponent's not going to play what they would have played otherwise that you could kill with it. Sometimes they're just going to attack in a way that you're really not getting the value out of your Rift Bolt because they know it's coming. Now, there are definitely scenarios where you're like, okay, I play on turn 4, you're like, I play a 3-drop and I suspend Rift Bolt. And that's pretty good because of the value you're getting with your mana. You're going to get to kill something probably on your next turn. But you're not always going to want to suspend it, and keep that in mind. That's what you do in Constructed modern burn decks, right? But you don't do it as often here just because you're not always wanting to dome the opponent in Limited, and that's what burn decks in modern do. They just want to dome the opponent with 90% of their burn spells, and that's not going to be true here. You need to use it as removal more often than you're going to need to dome your opponent with it, because you're not going to have the critical mass of burn spells that a Constructed deck has. But still a great card, and I think it's worth first picking a solid amount of the time. Next, we have Hoarding Dragon, a 5-mana 4/4 with flying. Already great stats. It's another air elemental, basically, but it has a bunch more text as well. Namely, you get to search your library for an artifact, exile it, and shuffle your library, and then when your dragon dies, you basically get to draw that artifact. So it ends up being a 2-for-1 in the end. If you have this card, you probably should have 1 to 2 artifacts in your deck, but if you don't, it's still a very efficient creature. Dragons is the black-red archetype, more or less, and it fits well into that. It can help you find mana rocks to play your even bigger dragons, so it synergizes very well. It is a very first pickable red uncommon, Hoarding Dragon is. I'd be happy to take it regularly. And then we have Fireball as the best uncommon. You know, Fireball's nuts. Every time we see Fireball, it's first pickable. You know, it almost feels like a rare. Not only can it do X damage to something, but if you want to, you can divide it all over the place. And it doesn't hurt that there's Roshin Meanderer in this set, which is a creature that lets you add 4 colorless mana to your mana pool to use for X spells. Doesn't hurt that red-green really looks like a ramp deck in general. So Fireball sometimes will just like destroy the board in decks that really get there on ramping. But it's a great card even without all of that information. Fireball, the very first pickable, one of the best uncommons in the set. Hoarding Dragon, also very first pickable, not as good as Fireball. Rift Bolt, sort of a tier below, but still pretty great. Right, now let's look at commons. At common, I have as the third best common, Pillar of Flame. Now, this is a burn spell. Red has a lot of those. 1 red to do 2 damage to a creature or player is nice. We don't often get to dome things anymore in current limited formats with like 1 mana spells like this. Usually you can only hit creatures, although I guess they did reprint Shock recently. But still, this is a good effect. It can exile things that it kills, which isn't always going to be relevant, but it will be occasionally. Mostly it's just a very efficient removal spell that you will almost always trade up for. You're going to pay 1 mana to kill their 3-drop or whatever. So, solid removal spell, first pickable in a very weak pack. Next, we have Draconic Roar, 2 mana to do 3, and it can only do it to creatures, but it has Dragon upside, and as I mentioned earlier, Dragons is a deck in this format, and the upside that this gives you of also getting to hit your opponent for 3 is great. Even if you don't have Dragons around in your hand or in play, it's still a very efficient removal spell, and I would take it over Pillar of Flame. Being instant speed makes it a lot better than Pillar of Flame, and it does 1 more damage too, though it doesn't dome the opponent. And I think the best red common is just Heat Ray. This kind of removal that scales as the game goes on, that can basically just kill anything in the long run, is great, and it's first pickable. Another card that'll fit well into decks running Roshin Meanderer as well. So red has a lot of good commons and uncommons. A lot of them are removal, but not all of them. Now let's move to green. I think the third best green uncommon is Overgrown Battlement. We've seen this card before. I think it was in original Zendikar, where there was a whole Defender theme. It's back. The Defender theme's back, though. It's a blue-green deck mostly. There's 1 red card that supports it. Again, I'll talk about these archetypes in more detail tomorrow. But it's a great card even if you have no other defenders. A 2-mana 0/4 that can ramp for you is great. It can block early if that's what you need, and then it can ramp you into things late. And if you have more defenders, it gets to be even more fun. I don't think I would first pick it most of the time, but it is a great ramp card if that's what you're interested in doing. Undercity Troll, another 2-drop that has Renown. This one can also regenerate. It's very strong. The fact that it can regenerate means it can be relevant at any stage of the game. Regenerators can block forever if you're leaving mana up. It gets to be quite large and regenerate if you hit the Renown. And once more, +1/+1 counters are a deck in this format. And I think the best green uncommon is Hero's Bane. This is one I would first pick in a lot of packs. It's basically a 5-mana 4/4, but it has a ridiculous mana sink ability where you get to double its power for 4 mana and toughness. You get to add X +1/+1 counters where X is its power every time you pay 4 mana. And again, +1/+1 counters are a theme in this deck, and green, black, and green, white are where we really see it. And obviously Hero's Bane fits into either of those decks. And it's just a great creature in general. It just grows and gets out of control if your opponent can't stop it. So I'd first pick Hero's Bane, and I'd be less excited about first picking Undercity Troll or Overgrown Battlement, but I'd be happy to take them pretty early. Now let's look at the best green commons. I think the third best green common is Nantuko Shaman. So most of the time you're going to want to suspend this. This is because it draws you a card if you have no tapped lands when it enters the battlefield. So suspending it on turn 4 is pretty great. It also comes into play with haste. You're going to get to draw your card when you play it, most likely. If in a pinch, you can just play it as a 3-mana 3/2, which isn't terrible. Certainly not an exciting card, but it is a card that draws you a card. It's a 3-mana 3/2 that draws you a card, which is nuts. Although I guess it's sort of a 4-mana 3/2 that draws you a card in that case, which is still a great card. So Nantuko Shaman, something that's nice, not something you want to first pick, but I think a lot of green decks are like, sure, I'll take 1 or 2 of these. Hunt the Weak is next. It's a good removal spell. We have Savage Stomp right now in Ixalan. It's kind of funny because a lot of these cards are just way more powerful than anything we'd see in Ixalan. That's not the case here. Savage Stomp is better in every way, costs less mana, and it can also cost even less mana if you're using it on a dinosaur, but that's not really the point here. This is still a good removal spell. It is clunky. It isn't the most efficient. If your opponent has mana up, you're going to be putting yourself in a little bit of danger when you cast it because you could easily get 2 for 1, but it is still a strong removal spell. +1/+1 counters, once again, a theme in this format, so Hunt the Weak is going to be good at sort of being a removal spell for green, and even better because of the +1/+1 counter synergies. And I think the best green common is Wall of Roots, another defender that can help you ramp. Wall of Roots, just, a 2-mana 0/5 is huge, and when you need it to, it can ramp for you. Granted, it can only do it 5 times, but that's plenty of times, right? You can only do it once a turn, but every turn if you're doing this, you're going to be a mana ahead of your opponent, and that's just great. Also a defender, which is a relevant line of text in this format. Now, let's look at the best artifacts. Normally, I don't look at artifacts, but this set has some artifacts that I think you want to take relatively highly, and as a result, I wanted to talk about the best artifacts. And I'm not talking about commons and uncommons, I'm just talking about the artifacts that are best that I don't really mind first picking, or, well, not first picking, but taking relatively early. So let's look at that. First of all, we have Mannequin. 2-mana 1/1 that ramps you. Solid, nothing special, but it is the kind of thing that a lot of decks are going to want to run. There's a lot of 6 and 7 drops in this format. Mannequin helps you get there. Next we have Palladium Mirror. I think this is a first pickable card. A 3-mana 2/2 who ramps you 2 mana is great. And this format, again, has lots and lots of big creatures you want to be playing and just dominating the game with. And then finally, we have Thran Dynamo, which is just an insane amount of ramp. 4 mana. You play it on turn 4 for 4 mana, and the next turn you can have 8 mana ready. So if you're a big ramp deck, if you're a deck that's trying to play these big 7 and 8 drops that just dominate the game, Thran Dynamo is going to be nuts. And I think any deck probably first picks Thran Dynamo and Palladium Mirror, unless there's some incredible rare or mythic or, some of the uncommons I would take over them as well. But they're so good and they ramp you into crazy things. Just getting so far ahead of your opponent on mana is incredibly powerful. All right, so that's sort of my assessment of what the best commons and uncommons for limited are in Iconic Masters. Don't forget to also check out my video on the top 10 bombs in the format, some of the things you might want to cast with Thran Dynamo. That video should also be out about when this one comes out. And tomorrow I'll be back with a guide to the archetypes of Iconic Masters Limited. Don't forget, my videos are sponsored by 5colorcombo.com, a great website for all things Magic. You can use my discount code NITSAHONE5 in their store for a 5% discount.